Hey there, welcome to DIY Projects with Pete. Today we're going to build a coffee table out of cedar wood and we'll wrap the sides with steel. If you find this video helpful, please give it a like and subscribe. Let's get started.
Alright, the first step is to cut the plywood down to size, mark for the cuts, and use a straight edge to draw out the lines. All the measurements can be found in the plans at DIYPete.com/coffee table with steel. Follow the lines as closely as you can with a circular saw. Take your time so you get a nice straight cut. Give the plywood a quick sanding to smooth out any rough areas, and then lay out the pickets to determine the best orientation. You could use 1x6 boards or pallet boards if you'd prefer. Cut the pickets using a miter saw so they are the same length as the plywood base. While building the tabletop, you'll need to rip down a couple of the end pickets on a table saw so they fit the plywood area just right. I used a combination of wood glue, a little construction adhesive, and nails to attach each picket to the plywood. Work from one end to the other, pressing down firmly on each board, and then secure the boards with 1-inch long nails. Try your best to get each board as close as possible to each other to minimize the gaps. Also, make sure to give the boards plenty of time to dry out prior to assembling to minimize the chances of the wood shrinking. To complete the tabletop, simply rip the end board down in width so it lines up with the edge of the plywood. Next, we'll make the table base. Cut the 4x4 boards for the legs, then the 2x4 boards, which are the supports. Go ahead and lay the boards on a flat surface prior to assembling, then use a pocket hole jig to make pocket holes on the ends of each 2x4 board. Set the jig for 1.5-inch stock settings. Insert the end of a board into the jig, clamp it, and simply use a drill and bit to make the holes. Repeat this process for each of the 2x4 boards. Use an orbital sander to sand the boards before assembling. Then check to make sure each section is square before connecting the boards. Use wood glue and 2.5-inch pocket hole screws at each joint. Take your time with this and make sure to work on a flat surface. Attach each of the 4 outer boards, then center the middle board and attach it to complete the frame of the base. Flip the base right side up to look it over and to double check that the legs are square and everything is level. Then slide the tabletop on the work surface and center the base. Attach the underside using wood glue and 2-inch long wood screws to the 2x4 and into the bottom of the plywood portion of the top. Now we'll start to make the lower shelf for the coffee table. The shelf is made using the same methods we used to create the tabletop. First, cut the plywood with a circular saw. Then mark at each corner for the pocket holes that will attach the lower shelf to the 4x4 legs. Set the pocket hole jig to the 3/4-inch stock settings and then drill 2 pocket holes at each corner. Use a scrap piece of wood as a spacer to help hold the plywood level when it is sitting in the pocket hole jig. Cut the pickets down in length on the miter saw and then attach each board exactly how we assembled the tabletop. Work from one end to the other and cut down the end boards as needed so they fit perfectly with the edge of the plywood. Once the shelf is complete, take some time to sand down the rough pickets until they're smooth, but keep a little texture on the wood if you'd like. I used 120 followed by 220 grit sandpaper. Slide the shelf between the 4x4 legs and use spacers to hold it at the height you'd like to attach the shelf. I chose 5.5 inches from the ground. Clamps come in really handy for holding the shelf while you attach it at each corner, so clamp the 2 ends and flip the table on its side. Then use wood glue and pocket hole screws to connect the shelf at each 4x4. Next, we'll take some time to sand the tabletop, making sure to smooth the top boards and to go along the edges as well. If any of your pickets are cut too long so they don't match up perfectly with the plywood, you can sand the ends of the board or use a planer.
For today's project, I'm going to use this water-based polycrylic sealer from Minwax. I really like this one because it's super durable, it dries quickly, and it's crystal clear, so it's going to leave the wood with kind of a raw and organic look.
Let's bust open a can and start the finishing process. I'll do a total of 2 coats of the water-based sealer. Start by getting the underside of the table and some of the hard-to-reach areas, then flip the table right side up and apply a coat to the pickets on the top side of the table. The wood will initially darken somewhat since it is wet, but when it dries, the wood will lighten back up quite a bit and you'll have a great looking finish. Work your way around all the surfaces and then let the first coat dry. The water-based sealers really do dry quickly, so you'll usually be able to sand between coats in a matter of just a few hours. Once dry, use 400 to 600 grit sandpaper to lightly go over the wood so it's super smooth, and when finished sanding, use a damp rag to remove the dust. Apply a second coat of the sealer, let it dry, and then we'll begin making and attaching the metal accents. Start by measuring the widths of the table to determine how long to cut the 1/8 inch thick metal flat bar. Then clamp the metal down and use a reciprocating saw or a metal cutoff blade to make the cut. Always wear all the recommended safety protection when cutting metal. Drill holes at each end to attach the flat bar in a later step. And to help the screws blend in, I'd recommend spraying them with a metallic paint or a dark paint of some sort. It's also a good time to seal the metal as well by using a spray sealer. Then start attaching the first piece of flat bar. The metal on the long sides of the tabletop will overlap the shorter side's flat bar, so we'll add on 1/4 of an inch to the overall length as noted in the plans. I like to use a little construction adhesive on the sides to help secure the metal. The flat bar should be secured at each end with 1-inch long screws. I'd recommend drilling additional holes evenly and then adding screws at each hole location to ensure the steel has a nice tight fit around the tabletop and the shelves. Continue working your way around the entire tabletop. The metal should be flush with the table's surface. Drilling a pilot hole prior to inserting the screws will help in more accurately lining up the metal. The plywood I used for the lower shelf did have a slight bow to it, so I used my handy jack clamp to level out the shelf before adding the flat bar. Attaching the flat bar held the shelf level and adds some additional reinforcement so you'll have a nice strong lower shelf. And that's all there is to it. I hope this inspires you to build something out in the garage. If you found this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. Please comment below and let me know what you'd like to see built in an upcoming DIY video. Thanks for watching and cheers from Montana.